Welcome back to my channel. This is Women in Priesthood. My name's Rachel. This is a channel for LDS women and men to study the prophet Russel M. Nelson's plea for us to prayerfully study all we can about priesthood power. I'm so touched by some of the comments and just a lot of the subscribers that have joined recently. You guys are really nice. You never know how it's going to go when you put yourself out there. And this recent video that I put out called Your 3 Priesthood Seasons in a Woman's Life, I just wanted to do a little shout out for some of the people who have commented. Noel Jensen, he said, "Thank you for sharing these insights, sister. I'm currently focused on deepening my understanding of priesthood." And one of the things I've been really surprised about with this channel is we're about 45% men view this channel, which is so exciting to me because one of the reasons I have this logo back here, the double hearts right up here with the priesthood, is because the more I've studied priesthood power, the more I realized this is a true understanding of priesthood power inside and outside the temple is able to bless us as men and women to becoming more collaborative, team-oriented, and unified. So I wanted to thank him for his comment, and also Mary Howard, you have just given me some really kind comments of encouragement. Winona Davies, thank you so much for reminding me of these incredible doctrines and teachings. You brought the Spirit to me as I watched. I hope you will continue to create content on your channel. This is such an important topic. Sharing our knowledge and experiences with one another is such a tremendous spiritual strength. That is such a great, thank you, Winona. That was just really awesome. I am not going to lie. I feel like as we grow this channel, we're really looking for our tribe, right? There's, if you're going to be unkind, if you're going to say, unkind things, I'll probably block you, because we're really looking for a tribe of faithful LDS people who are going to be kind and respectful and share their thoughts and insights about priesthood power, share conference talks, and those kinds of things. So thank you so much for everyone who's been subscribing lately and sending me support. We had a really good video yesterday or a couple days ago about the priesthood treasures, Russel M. Nelson's landmark talk, which really opened up this discussion, this mystery of priesthood. I think on a lot of levels, continuing the metaphor of we're solving a case. We're solving the case of priesthood power. This case, this article, this general conference talk, that spiritual treasures that President Nelson gave, it was honestly the case about priesthood power for women had kind of gone cold. There was an uptick of talks about it in around 2014, and we'll get into that a little bit. There was an uptick of talks talking about priesthood power and mentioning women, and then there was really not a lot, and there was like having all these random tiny little clues that don't really give you a clear picture. And then you had this landmark talk by President Nelson that we went over in our last video, The Great Priesthood Mystery. And this was 2019. I was meditating and thinking about his comment at the very end of the talk. Let me just find it. He leaves us with an interesting statement at the end of this talk. He says, and this is Spiritual Treasures by President Russel M. Nelson. I wanted to dive into this warning that he gives us. He says, now, quote, "Now a little word of warning. There are those who would undermine your ability to call upon the power of God. There are some who would have you doubt yourself and minimize your stellar spiritual capacity as righteous women. Most certainly, the adversary does not want you to understand the covenant you made at baptism or the profound endowment of knowledge and power you have received or will receive in the temple, the house of the Lord. And Satan certainly does not want you to understand that every time you worthily serve and worship in the temple, you leave armed with God's power and with his angels having charge over you. Satan and his minions will constantly contrive roadblocks to prevent you from understanding the spiritual gifts which you have been and can be blessed. Unfortunately, some roadblocks may be a result of misbehavior. Okay, I want to go back to these 3 paragraphs that start with a little word of warning. This is an interesting question, is how could the adversary immobilize an entire contingent of God's army, of the mothers of Zion, from the things that President Nelson warns of here? He says, how can you get, so let's look at this. How could you get a group of women to minimize yourself and doubt your stellar capacity? How could you get them to, he says, certainly the adversary does not want you to understand the covenant you made at baptism. And certainly the adversary does not want you to understand the profound endowment of knowledge and power you have received or will receive in the temple, the house of the Lord. I have been thinking about that idea a lot over the years. And I do think it comes down to one element, I think, of immobilizing people who are really trying to understand the profound endowment of knowledge that you receive in the temple, is getting them to have a fixed mindset or a very inflexible view of what it is, of an openness of what they're looking for. The way that I am going to illustrate this is a little story of my own. Is called the parable of the cereal bowl. So I have a toddler, and a couple weeks ago, he regularly will wake up early. He will demand cereal. And one morning he was really upset, and he said, "I want cereal." And I was like, "Buddy, you've got cereal right there in your bowl." "I want cereal." "Buddy, look, you have cereal. I just gave you some cereal." He was so upset that I had to walk over and physically take his tiny little head and tilt it to look in the bowl and say, "Buddy, you have cereal in your bowl." And he looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, "But I wanted a blue bowl." So he had in his mind the way that he thought the cereal would look in his blue bowl. And because he had such a fixed mindset, such a fixed image of what he expected it to look like to have cereal, he couldn't even see that he had a full bowl of cereal. So that's the metaphor that I'm going to use to describe one way that I think current pop culture and the adversary has immobilized a lot of us from really recognizing that we have access to priesthood power. And from that point, once you embrace that premise, you don't even study it. You won't even question or read conference talks or be open to learning. One of those movements, I think, around 2000, the late 2000s, you had a movement in the church led by women of the church called the Ordained Women Movement. Without spending a whole lot of time on it, the basic premise of this movement was that women deserve equal status and equal rights in the church. And to ensure that they have equal rights and equal status in the church, they must be ordained with the priesthood. I'll just read a little bit of their current website, which I think makes more sense if you read exactly what they're arguing for. Ordained Women aspires to create a space for Mormons to articulate issues of gender equality they may be hesitant to raise. As a group, we intend to put ourselves in the public eye and call attention for the ordination of Mormon women to the priesthood. So this happened around the 2000s. Around 2014, the leaders of this organization were excommunicated. And maybe if we can separate the personal from the ideology, that the idea was that women, the premise is that women are not equal And that in order for women to be equal in terms of the priesthood, they must be ordained. So this is an interesting premise, because if you are a woman and you are saying must be ordained, so that is such a tricky way to immobilize how the adversary, I think, has immobilized a lot of us from even studying about the priesthood, because we've embraced this idea of, oh, it's like looking at the cereal bowl, that example I gave. He's looking for the cereal bowl to be blue in order to be able to see that the bowl is already full of cereal. And for many of us, we've been looking for ordination, to be ordained as a sign that we have access to priesthood power, when the reality is that we have access to priesthood power through covenants. One of the things that happened around that time is President Oakes gave a series of very good talks about the power of the priesthood. They were given at priesthood sessions, but within those talks, he gave a series of clues that are very illuminating about what priesthood power is in and of itself. And the timing of those talks, right around the time that the ordained women movement leaders were excommunicated, shows that not only were those leaders excommunicated, but the ideas that they were teaching were also not true doctrine. And here's where he teaches what true doctrine is. He mentions, quote, and then once again, this is The Powers of the Priesthood by Elder Oakes. The Melchizedek priesthood is not a status or a label. It is a divine power held in trust for use for the benefit of God's work for his children. We should always remember that men who hold the priesthood are not the priesthood. It is not appropriate to refer to the priesthood and women. We should refer to priesthood holders and women. So let's just reread that. He says, quote, we should always remember that men who hold the priesthood are not the priesthood. So I have you can see in the links below, I have a little study guide that I've made up that you can get on the website. The way that I depict priesthood is that it is God's total power. And President Renlund and his wife wrote a book called The Melchizedek Priesthood, and that's one of the ways that they define it, is the priesthood is God's total power, which he grants to us. And Joseph F. Smith said, hope you can see this. He said that the priesthood, Joseph F. Smith described the priesthood as, quote, the power of God delegated to man, by which man can act in the earth for the salvation of the human family. I love that quote, that priesthood power on the earth, when we see it at church, that's just such a limited view of what the priesthood is. What we see at church is a delegated power. And who delegated it? God delegated it. It's his power. It's God's power. It's not ours, and it's not an individual's. And people who have temporary callings to hold priesthood authority, it's still not their power. They are conduits for God's power. So that's one reason why. And then reiterating Elder Oakes' talk, where he says we should always remember that men who hold the priesthood are not the priesthood. It is not appropriate to refer to the priesthood to say, okay, the priesthood and the women. Men are not concurrent with the word the priesthood. We should make these specialized designations that there's men who've been ordained to the priesthood. And that is one reason why when you look at the diagram that I was referred to, right, I've got the little Melchizedek priesthood, the patriarchal priesthood. It's all encompassed by God's total power. So let's go back to President Nelson's talk, where he issues his warning. Most certainly and this is spiritual treasures. Most certainly the adversary does not want you to understand the covenant you made at baptism, or the profound endowment of knowledge and power you have received or will receive in the temple, the house of the Lord. And Satan certainly does not want you to understand that every time you worthily serve and worship in the temple, you leave armed with God's power and with his angels having charge over you. Satan and his minions will constantly contrive roadblocks to prevent you from understanding the spiritual gifts with which you have been and can be blessed. So I just think it's interesting that one of those roadblocks was getting women and maybe some men, because I think men have been really helpful in helping us. I will say that the best priesthood instructor I've had has been my dad. He's taught me a lot about the priesthood in his example and in instruction. So one of the most powerful ways that the adversary can prevent us from understanding the profound endowment of knowledge that we've been given, to prevent us from understanding that every time we go to the temple, we are endowed with more priesthood power and that angels watch over us and that we can be blessed from those priesthood ordinances. The best way he can do that is by getting us to accept the premise, the basic premise that unless you are ordained, you do not have access to priesthood power. That's why it's so powerful that President Nelson is teaching that, well, President Oaks is teaching that no, priesthood power does not belong to any one person. Priesthood power is God's total power. And as President Nelson says up here, and we access that priesthood power directly through covenants, right? Here's this diagram that I've been using to make sense. We have the Melchizedek priesthood. We have the patriarchal priesthood over here, which is the heart, which is all things that happen in the temple in eternity. And the hearts, each of these hearts symbolize a covenant that you make. President Russel M. Nelson has said that let's look it up. He says, every woman and every man who makes covenants with God and keeps those covenants and who participates worthily in priesthood ordinances has direct access to the power of God. That's amazing. Where in the early maybe 2000s, we were really, it's that cereal bowl analogy. We were looking for ordination. Ordination is the thing that gives you access to priesthood power. So only people who are ordained can have access to priesthood power. And what President Nelson is correcting here, he's giving us a clue in this mystery and saying it's not ordination, it's covenant making. Covenant making and covenant keeping is what gives you access to God's total priesthood power. You make covenants at baptism. You journey through your life. You make even greater covenants in the temple when you decide to receive your endowments. And in the temple, you receive even greater degrees of priesthood power and authority in order to help and bless your family. This is really, really remarkable that they're teaching us that. I have this diagram down here. That covenants, the Savior's power activates your covenants. So the Savior ultimately is giving us access to priesthood power because it's the making and keeping of these specific covenants of baptism, of receiving your endowment and receiving your sealing, that allows you to gain access. So I think I just was meditating on that idea of, if I was the adversary, how would I fulfill this? How would I get an entire generation of mothers of Zion to doubt that they have any priesthood power in their life? I would get them to embrace the idea that they have to be ordained to have priesthood power. But President Russel M. Nelson is teaching us that is incorrect. If you have access to God's total priesthood power by virtue of the covenants that you make. And that goes for men and for women. I have a website that I have put this is my little study guide that I've been using for a couple of years now. And you can go on the website, and this is what's on it. You have a little letter from me. You have this diagram that shows, what's God's power. It's God's total priesthood. That is what God's power is. You come down here and you have the diagram we're working with, which is meant to be interactive, I have to say. Let me pull it up. One of the things that I'll do with the young women is say, let's anticipate that you're going to have different stages of your life. And that's what the former video that I made with the 3 priesthood seasons. It's a good way to intro youth and women, I think, about the idea of priesthood power. You're going to start here in the first priesthood season. You're going to make his baptism. So let's say you go through your life. This is your life journey. And eventually you decide you're going to go on a mission. And so then you get your endowment. And then maybe you go on your mission and it takes a little longer than you expected to get married. So you're here for a while and then eventually you get married. It allows you to personalize it though. So let's say you're like my grandmother and you get baptized, but you don't get endowed for a really long time. And then she didn't get sealed until she was 75. But you know what? She still was able to receive these priesthood powers. Additionally, what if you're a woman who gets baptized, but you don't ever get a chance to be sealed? This diagram shows that you have already made covenants in the patriarchal order of the priesthood. And so you have really been, because you have made these covenants, you are in a place where the fullness of priesthood power is available to you. And maybe there are some things in this life that you don't get blessed with, but because you've kept and made sacred eternal covenants within the patriarchal order of the priesthood, which is a priesthood that governs eternity and family life, that you'll receive those blessings that you didn't have in this life. So go ahead and check that out. That's on the website. And it's just got a few fun diagrams that you can use as you're following the channel. Other things that we're going to cover. And it also is something that I have, especially that last activity that I just showed you. I've used that with young women, the little interactive diagram, because I think it allows them to imagine how their life's going to go and plan it out and understand the seasons of their life as they relate to the different priesthood covenants they've made. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for all the kind comments and for subscribing. And I hope that this continues to be meaningful. I'm really enjoying getting to know everybody. So you guys have a great day and we will see you soon. Bye.